You need permits to build on land you own. In some places, you even need permission to collect rainwater that falls on your property. Think about this for a second. Water from the sky, land you paid for, and you need state approval to use either. This isn't a quirk of bureaucracy. It's a perfect demonstration of something much deeper. We're told slavery ended, but apply basic logic to how we actually exist, and what emerges is slavery that simply scaled up and got better marketing. The whips became paperwork. The chains became debt. The masters became institutions. And the slaves were taught to defend their own slavery by calling it civilization. Let's look at the definition of slavery. The international standard, the 1930 Forced Labor Convention, ILO number 29, gives the following definition. All work or service which is extracted from any person under the menace of any penalty and for which the said person has not offered himself voluntarily. So, you cannot opt out without punishment that threatens survival. Your labor's product is taken under threat, and you have no realistic way to live without losing access to resources necessary for life. Can you opt out of the economic system? Try living without documents, without paying taxes, without participating in the money economy. Every piece of land in every modern nation is either owned or controlled by the state. Building shelter requires permits. Growing food requires compliance with agricultural regulations. Hunting and fishing require licenses. Even being homeless is criminalized in most urban centers. Refuse to participate and you face fines, imprisonment, or death. That's forced participation. Not in some countries, but in every country that calls itself developed. Even if you live on a boat in Guatemala, you're not free. They demand boat registration, navigation permits cost money, and you still need visas to go anywhere. It's just a different layer of bureaucracy. The extraction is obvious. Before you receive money you supposedly earned, multiple entities take their cut. Income tax, social security, Medicare, pension contributions. After you get it, they take more. Sales tax, property tax, vehicle registration, fuel tax, communication tax. Use what's left to buy land, property tax forever, or they seize it. Start a business, licensing fees, regulatory compliance, corporate tax, payroll tax, import duties. At every single point where value changes hands, extraction occurs. The average person in a developed nation works from January to May just to pay their total tax burden. And refusing means men with guns eventually show up. That's extraction under threat of violence. But surely you can leave. Go live in the woods, raise goats, grow vegetables. Except the woods are owned, either privately or by the state. The land requires purchase and perpetual tax payments. Building codes dictate what shelter you can construct. The goats need veterinary certificates and agricultural registration. The vegetables, if sold or bartered, require tax reporting and often agricultural permits. Your very existence requires identification documents. Try crossing any border without papers. Try accessing any resource without proof of your assigned number. Try existing anywhere on Earth without being claimed by some state as its property. There is no legitimate exit that doesn't lead back into another identical system or to punishment. Classical slavery had one person owning another. Modern slavery has everyone owned by abstract systems. the state, the corporation, the market. This isn't better. It's worse. You can't rebel against an obstruction. You can't assassinate a system. You can't even clearly identify your master because your master is distributed across thousands of regulations, departments, and enforcement mechanisms. The genius move was renaming slavery as freedom. You're free to choose between employers, like being free to choose which field to work. You're free to vote to select which management style you prefer for your captivity. You're free to speak as long as you don't threaten the system's functioning. You're free to travel with proper documentation, vaccination records, and approval. You're free to trade within regulated markets using approved currencies. Every freedom is actually a permission within predetermined boundaries. They even made slaves proud of their slavery. They called it patriotism. When the system needs resources, oil fields in the Middle East, rare earth mines in Africa, shipping lanes in Asia, it sends its slaves to kill and die for these assets. But slaves won't die for corporate profit margins or geopolitical chess moves. So they're told they're dying for freedom, for democracy, for their way of life. The slave's blood becomes the slave's honor, the ultimate inversion. Slaves killing other slaves to maintain the very system that enslaves them both and feeling proud about it. And even if you don't share this ideology, you're still coerced into it, because refusal is illegal. Conscription, draft, mandatory service, the system ensures that when it needs bodies, yours is available. Then look at the debt mechanism. Before you take your first breath, you already owe. Your share of national debt exists before you do. In the United States, it's over $100,000 per citizen, including children. Education doesn't free you, it indebts you. Average student loan debt exceeds annual median income in most developed nations. Housing, 30-year mortgages are normal, meaning you'll work half of your life just for shelter. Healthcare, even with insurance, a major illness means bankruptcy for most. Starting a business requires capital, which means debt. The entire economy runs on credit, which means the entire population runs on obligation. Debt is literally bondage, from the Latin obligare, meaning to bind. You are bound to labor until you pay, and the system ensures you'll never fully pay. Interest rates, inflation, and recurring costs guarantee perpetual obligation. The bureaucratic maze isn't accidental either. Tax codes, thousands of pages long. Regulations no human could fully comprehend. Forms that require professional help to complete. Constant fear of making an error that could destroy you financially. This learned helplessness is deliberate psychological conditioning. You're meant to feel too stupid to exist without the system, too small to challenge it, too confused to see it clearly. The complexity isn't a bug, it's a feature. It creates a priest class of lawyers and accountants who interpret the sacred texts of regulation for a fee, making you dependent on intermediaries for basic life functions. When confronted with this logic, people defend their slavery. They say without the system there would be chaos, as if the system doesn't create most of the chaos it claims to protect you from. Crime emerges from poverty the system creates. Wars are fought for resources the system wants. Economic crashes happen because the system gambles with your labor. They say we need it for roads and hospitals, as if infrastructure justifies forced servitude. Medieval serfs also got protection and land use from their lords. That didn't make them free. They say it's the best system we have, as if the best form of slavery is still not slavery. But the most insidious defense is that this is voluntary, that it's a social contract you implicitly agreed to. What contract? When did you sign it? Were you given an option to refuse? A contract requires informed consent between equals with the option to decline. Being born into a system that threatens you with death or imprisonment if you don't comply isn't a contract. It's coercion. The social contract is a philosophical fig leaf covering naked force. The agricultural slave could at least see their bondage. They knew who owned them. They could dream of killing their master or running away. Modern slaves can't even name their condition because the language to describe it has been systematically destroyed. When you call imprisonment freedom and slavery citizenship, when you call exploitation opportunity and extraction contribution, you've perfected a control system that maintains itself through the minds of the controlled. I was watching documentaries about history of slavery, and I particularly registered something important they mentioned. Slaves born into slavery were easier to control than those who remembered freedom. First-generation slaves required chains and constant violence, but their children didn't need chains. Slavery was their normal. Now look at us. Your parents apply for your slave number. They call it a social security number or national insurance number, while you're still in the hospital. By the time you can think, you've already spent years in an institution designed to normalize your servitude. School doesn't teach you to question why you need permission to exist. It teaches you to compete for better positions within your captivity. 12 years minimum of conditioning, and by the end, you can't even imagine life outside the system. Ask anyone how they'd live without documents, without the state, without the structure. Watch them panic. But who would build the roads? Who would provide security? They literally cannot conceive of existence outside their bondage. Your parents tell you that you have more opportunities than they did. Your grandparents say you live better than they ever could. And materially, that might be true, but this is like house slaves telling field slaves' children they're lucky to work indoors. The conditions improved, the structure remained. You're still property. You just have better accommodations. This isn't a call to action or a manifesto for revolution. The system knows perfectly how to deal with these. This is simply recognition of what is. You are not free. You are held in a sophisticated form of bondage that has been hidden from you through linguistic manipulation, psychological conditioning, and systemic complexity. Your owners don't need whips because they've colonized your mind. You police yourself, pay your own maintenance costs, and thank them for the privilege. The only difference between you and a classical slave is that your slavery is distributed across institutions instead of concentrated in a single master, and you've been trained from birth to call it freedom. The system even took from you the dignity of knowing you're a slave. You defend your bondage. You attack those who point it out. You believe you're free because you can choose between Coke and Pepsi, between Democrat and Republican, between Apple and Android. These are choices slaves are allowed to make. They don't make you free. Recognition doesn't free you from the cage, but it ends your collaboration with your own enslavement. You can't escape the system. It owns every inch of land, controls every resource, monitors every transaction. But you can stop calling your cage a home. You can stop defending your chains as jewelry. You can stop confusing permissions for freedoms. That's not conspiracy or ideology. That's just logic applied to observable reality. That's the main source of all the anxiety and depression. We don't even know what true freedom feels like.